Amid seeds of hope and oceans of distance, two hearts seek each other. When silence separates the Colombian farmer and the young Spanish woman, an impossible journey across continents begins. Some call it madness, others destiny. They simply call it love. The sun rose lazily over the fields of San Miguel, a small village in the interior of Colombia. The first golden rays illuminated the cornfield that stretched as far as the eye could see, like a rolling carpet of vibrant green. Walking among the well-aligned rows was Tomás Herrera, a man of medium stature, with calloused hands and skin bronzed from working under the tropical sun. At 28 years old, Tomás bore the features of someone who had grown up understanding both the value of hard work and the weight of absence. His brown eyes, deep like the soil he cultivated, rarely lingered in idle chatter but shone intensely when he spoke about farming. His smile, though understated, had the ability to light up the environment around him. "The land is wise," Don Ernesto, his father, used to say before a sudden fever took him away when Tomás was just 15. "It teaches patience. There's no use in pulling the corn to make it grow faster." These words echoed in Tomás' memory as he checked the newly planted seedlings. In the pocket of his faded cotton shirt, he always carried a small dark wooden rosary, a legacy from his mother who had passed 2 years ago. It was his amulet, his connection to the past, a constant reminder that roots are important. The house where he lived was simple, made of adobe with a clay roof, and had a small porch from which one could watch the sunrise and sunset. The interior walls were decorated only with a few black and white photographs and a crucifix above the bed. Solitude was his most constant companion, broken only by the old radio that played traditional songs on the quieter nights. Thousands of kilometers away, in Valencia, Spain, Lucia Martinez woke up in her spacious room, with silk curtains filtering the morning light. At 25, she possessed a delicate beauty, with greenish-gray eyes that seemed to carry a constant question. Her brown hair fell in soft waves to her shoulders, and her slender hands, which had never known hard labor, handled books and brushes with the same dedication with which Tomás tended to his crops. The only daughter of a traditional family, Lucia grew up surrounded by privileges and expectations. Her room was filled with books on art, literature, and anthropology, interests that her mother, Carmen, tolerated with a certain discomfort. "Ideas do not build a stable future, daughter," Carmen would say, while perfectly aligning the cutlery on the dining table. At 50, Carmen was a woman of aristocratic beauty and impeccable posture, whose smiles rarely reached her eyes. She had planned Lucia's life like an architect plans a building, with precision and no room for improvisations. On that particular morning, Lucia was packing her bags with a mix of anxiety and excitement. She had signed up as a volunteer for an agricultural project in Colombia, something that caused as much astonishment as disapproval in her social circle. 6 months in South America, among peasants. Carmen couldn't hide the horror in her voice. "What will the Montalvos say about our engagement dinner?" Lucia sighed, feeling the weight of expectations like a mantle too heavy to bear. The engagement to Alejandro Montalvo, the son of an influential banker, was yet another item on the list of plans her mother had laid out for her. "There is no engagement yet, Mama," she replied softly, carefully folding a simple cotton blouse. "And when I return, perhaps I will have discovered what I really want." What she wanted, although she couldn't yet fully articulate it, was something real. Something that would make her heart beat faster, that would give her the feeling of being truly alive, not just existing within an elegant, yet suffocating box. When the dusty white truck rolled into San Miguel, bringing the agricultural program volunteers, the small village seemed to awaken from its usual slumber. Children ran alongside the vehicle, and the elders watched with curiosity from the shade of their porches. Lucia stepped down with shaky legs after the long journey over bumpy roads. The heat enveloped her immediately, so different from the mild climate of Valencia. Her hair, once perfectly arranged, was now tied back in a messy ponytail, and her usually pale face was marked by reddish patches from the heat and excitement. Tomás observed from a distance, tasked by the local coordinator to welcome the foreigners and teach them the basics of tropical horticulture. He smiled subtly as he watched the young Spanish woman trying to balance a backpack that was too large for her slim frame while holding a hoe as if it were an alien object. When he finally approached to help her, his first words came naturally. "That's not how the land understands your request," he commented, with a slight smile at the corners of his lips, pointing to the way she was holding the tool. Lucia looked up, momentarily confused, and then laughed, a crystalline sound that seemed to echo across the open field. "Then teach me its language," she replied, handing him the hoe with a theatrically solemn gesture. Something in that moment, perhaps the simplicity of the encounter, perhaps the contrast between the worlds they represented, marked the beginning of a connection that neither of them could have predicted. In the days that followed, Lucia found herself fascinated not only by the lush nature that surrounded her, but also by Tomás's simple and deep wisdom. He taught her about the seasons, about how to recognize when a plant needed water just by the shade of its leaves, about the invisible dance between the earth, the sun, and the rain. "Every plant has its time," he explained as they walked among the rows of the community garden. "There's no point in being in a hurry. Nature doesn't understand urgency, only cycles." For Lucia, raised in a world where everything seemed controlled and timed, those lessons had a meaning that went beyond agriculture. She observed Tomás's hands, so different from hers, calloused, strong, aware of real work, and felt an admiration she couldn't explain. At dusk, when the daily work ended, they often found themselves under an old mango tree, whose branches formed a perfect canopy. There they shared stories that, although different in form, revealed themselves to be similar in essence. "My father used to say that our hands should always be busy and our hearts always open," Tomás said once, while peeling a mango with the skill of someone who had done it since childhood. "When he died, I felt as if the sun had decided not to rise anymore." "I'm sorry," Lucia murmured, observing how his face, usually serene, took on a vulnerable expression. "How did you overcome it?" "Planting," he replied simply. "With each seed I placed in the ground, it was as if I was burying a little bit of the pain too, and when they sprouted, well, life went on, didn't it?" Lucia thought of her own experience, so sheltered from pain and real hardships. In her home, problems were disguised under linen tablecloths and polite conversations. There was never room for open mourning, for genuine expressions of feeling. "In my house," she shared, "the dinners are silent. Everyone talks, but no one really says anything. It's as if there's a script that everyone follows." Tomás watched her with genuine attention, without judgment, just absorbing her words like the earth absorbs the rain, completely without waste. "And you?" he asked, offering her a piece of juicy mango. "Do you follow that script?" The question hung in the air for a few seconds as Lucia savored the sweet fruit and reflected. "Am I here, aren't I?" he finally replied, with a smile that contained both uncertainty and hope. It was on an afternoon of heavy rain, when the sky fell upon San Miguel in a violent torrent, that something between them changed subtly. The group of volunteers had quickly scattered, running for shelter, but Lucia remained by Tomás's side, helping him protect the newly planted seedlings with pieces of plastic. The rain fell so heavily that they were soon soaked, Lucia's hair sticking to her face, Tomás's shirt heavy with water. They worked in concentrated silence, moving in sync as if they had been doing this together for years, not weeks. When they finished, they ran to take shelter under the small roof of the local chapel, a simple construction with white walls and a bell worn by time. The interior was empty, lit only by the diffused light coming through the high windows. Breathing heavily, they looked at each other and smiled, a moment of silent complicity that said more than many words could express. It was then that Lucia noticed Tomás's automatic movement, bringing his hand to his shirt pocket where she knew he kept the rosary. "Why do you never take that rosary out of your pocket?" she asked, while twisting her wet hair. The question seemed to catch Tomás by surprise. His fingers caressed the object through the fabric, as if seeking courage in the worn beads. "Because it reminds me that there are paths we don't choose, but they lead exactly where we need to be," he finally replied, in a voice lower than usual. Lucia's eyes suddenly welled up, although she didn't know exactly why. Perhaps because of the honesty of those words, perhaps because of the contrast with all the artificiality she had left behind. Maybe I came from so far away to learn that, she said, her voice trembling with contained emotion. The silence that followed was not awkward, but full, like the words had opened up a space for something deeper to blossom. The sound of rain on the tin roof created a perfect background music for that moment of mutual recognition. Neither moved to shorten the physical distance between them, but something invisible had changed. A silent bridge built between two worlds that, until then, seemed irreconcilable. Weeks turned into months, and with each day shared on the land, the connection between them deepened. There wasn't a specific moment when they admitted their feelings. It wasn't needed. It was as if love had grown organically between them, just like the plants they cultivated together, gradual, firm, and inevitable. However, like all seasons, Lucia's time in San Miguel had a predetermined end. The date of her departure, once so distant, now loomed over them like a storm cloud on the horizon. On the eve of her return to Spain, they walked together to a small lake on the outskirts of the village. The sunset transformed the water into a golden mirror, and the silence between them carried the weight of everything they felt and everything they feared. "I will write every day," promised Lucia, her voice betraying the uncertainty she felt, "and I will return as soon as I can." Tomás nodded, his eyes fixed on the horizon as if searching for some sign that the future would be generous with them. "Distance doesn't change what's true," he finally replied, wrapping her in an embrace that seemed to want to capture every detail of that moment. The next morning, when the truck departed, taking Lucia and the other volunteers, Tomás remained still in the small village square, rosary clutched in hand, watching until the vehicle was nothing more than a cloud of dust on the horizon. Lucia's first letters arrived regularly. Pages and pages written in her elegant handwriting, recounting her readjustment to Spanish life, how everything seemed different now, how she missed the smell of the earth after rain and Tomás's discreet smile. He kept each letter in a small wooden box he had carved especially for this purpose, rereading them on lonely nights when the longing tightened like a clenched fist around his heart. His responses were shorter. Words were never his strong suit, but they were filled with sincerity. He talked about the crops, about the village children who always asked about her, about how he had planted flowers around his house because they reminded him of the perfume she wore. But gradually, the responses to his letters began to take longer. And then, they stopped completely. What Tomás didn't know was that, in Valencia, Carmen Martinez had discovered her daughter's correspondence. Horrified by the idea that Lucia might be truly in love with a Colombian farmer, she began intercepting the letters, both those arriving and those Lucia tried to send. "Do you think love survives hunger and mud?" she asked coldly when Lucia confronted her about a letter that had disappeared. "He is a farmer, Lucia. Leave him in the past. Your life is here with people of your own standing." Lucia cried entire nights, torn between loyalty to her family and love for Tomás. The pressures increased, the engagement to Alejandro being mentioned more frequently, the insistence that she needed to return to reality, the veiled suggestion that she might be suffering from some sort of temporary romantic fixation. Isolated, not knowing why Tomás had stopped responding, Lucia began to doubt. Maybe her mother was right. Maybe that love had been just an impossible dream, born in the heat and strangeness of a place so far from her reality. Meanwhile, in San Miguel, the lack of news from Lucia turned Tomás's days into an exercise in faith. He clung to the rosary and his memories, refusing to believe that what they had shared could simply vanish. 6 months after the silence began, he gathered his savings and traveled to Bogotá, determined to get a visa for Spain. At the consulate, he presented himself with the dignity of someone who knows his own worth, despite the simple clothes and hands marked by labor. The clerk behind the counter examined his documents with disinterest, then looked at his dirt-stained hands and laughed with disdain. "You want to enter Europe for love. That's not a sufficient reason." The red stamp of DENIED echoed like a final sentence. On the way out, Tomás sat down on a stone bench, the weight of failure bending his shoulders. He took the rosary out of his pocket and squeezed it tightly, not in a specific prayer, but as a gesture of connection with everything he believed in. His gaze lifted to the deep blue sky, not in defiance, but in silent acceptance that some paths are longer and harder than others. The years that followed brought a severe drought to San Miguel. The crops withered, the river receded, and hope seemed as scarce as the rain. Tomás lost almost everything he had planted, yet he continued working, day after day, driven by a resilience that impressed even the oldest in the village. One night, unable to sleep due to his worries, he decided to walk to the riverbank, now reduced to a trickle of water that sadly snaked between exposed rocks. It was there, illuminated by the full moon, that he found a small stranded boat, seemingly washed down from somewhere upstream during the last storm. Inside the worn-out vessel, amidst dry leaves and hardened mud, there was a wet and partially torn map. Tomás examined it under the silvery moonlight and identified a route drawn in pencil, beginning near where he was and ending in Manaus, Brazil, the gateway to the Amazon. That map seemed more than a coincidence to him. It was a call, a sign that perhaps there was a way, albeit long and dangerous, to find Lucia again. Without hesitation, he gathered what little he had. Some clothes, a small knife, seeds of various species kept in cloth pouches, his most precious belongings, his mother's rosary and Lucia's letters. He left a note for his neighbor, asking them to take care of his house, and set off before dawn. The first days were the easiest, crossing familiar regions where the language and customs were well known to him. He slept under the stars, traded work for food on isolated farms, and advanced guided by the worn map and the determination burning in his chest. As he approached the border with Brazil, the landscape changed dramatically. The forest became denser, the paths less defined, the challenges more intense. Torrential rains caught him by surprise, and nights in the jungle brought sounds that seemed to come from another world. Fevers attacked him more than once, leaving him bedridden for days, tended by strangers who took pity on the solitary traveler. Some called him crazy when he mentioned his destination. Others, especially the elder members of the indigenous tribes he encountered along the way, looked at him with silent respect, recognizing the strength of a pilgrim, driven by something greater than himself. The rosary became his symbol and identity. "The Pilgrim of the Rosary," they whispered as he passed through remote villages. Some offered food and shelter without being asked. Others pointed out safer paths or helped him cross rivers in borrowed canoes. The journey that should have lasted weeks stretched into months. His body thinned, his beard grew, but his eyes retained the same determined sparkle from the first day. Each step was an unspoken prayer, each obstacle overcome, a renewal of his faith in the journey. While Tomás advanced through the vast greenness of the Amazon, in Valencia, Lucia was facing her own challenges. The engagement with Alejandro Montalvo, arranged by her mother, had been announced at an elegant party but never culminated in marriage. Something always seemed missing, a genuine connection, a mutual understanding that went beyond appearances. "You are always absent, even when you are here," Alejandro complained once, after a particularly silent dinner. Lucia could not deny it. A part of her had remained in San Miguel, among the cornfields and under the mango tree where she had shared so many moments with Tomás. When Carmen suddenly passed away, the victim of an aneurysm, Lucia found among her mother's belongings a box with all the letters Tomás had sent, and her own, never dispatched. The discovery was like a lightning bolt illuminating complete darkness, painful but revealing. The mourning for her mother mingled with the mourning for a love she believed lost by choice, not interference. Now, alone and free from family pressures, Lucia began to redesign her life. She broke off the engagement, dedicated herself to social projects, and started attending exhibitions on Latin American cultures, seeking to keep alive the connection with the world she had briefly known, but which had transformed her forever. It was at one of these exhibitions, dedicated to photographs of the Amazon, that her heart stopped momentarily. On a wall filled with images of the forest and its inhabitants, there was a portrait of a thin man with a short beard and a deep gaze she would recognize anywhere in the world. On his chest, hung discreetly, was the rosary she had often seen in Tomás' hands. The caption simply read, "Tomás Herrera, the man who crossed the jungle." With trembling hands, Lucia approached the photograph, touching it as if she could reach through the paper to the person portrayed. A gallery employee, noticing her interest, commented casually, "It's an incredible story. This Colombian man is crossing the Amazon on foot, apparently because of a lost love. The photographer found him near Manaus, sick but determined. They say he carries letters and seeds and intends to reach Europe." Those words were like an alarm clock for something dormant inside Lucia. Without thinking twice, she left the exhibition and that very night booked a ticket to Manaus. The hospital where Tomás was admitted was a simple structure by the banks of the Rio Negro, with peeling white walls and lazily spinning fans on the high ceiling. Malaria had struck him fiercely, leaving him feverish and delirious for days. It was there, between consciousness and delirium, that he opened his eyes one morning and saw, sitting beside his bed, not a mirage, but Lucia, her hair now shorter, her face more mature, but her eyes just as he remembered. Green, deep, full of questions and answers. "I knew the path would bring me to you," he murmured, with a weak but luminous smile. She cried, holding the rosary she had found on the bedside table, feeling the weight of the wooden beads as if she were holding time itself in her hands. "And I knew that true love is never lost, just delayed," she replied, leaning in to kiss his feverish forehead. The reunion was silent, punctuated only by the distant sound of the forest and the constant beep of medical equipment. They needed no grand declarations or elaborate explanations. The journey, both physical and emotional, had spoken for itself. When Tomás regained enough strength, Lucia told him about the letters she had found, about her mother's death, about how she had never really stopped thinking about him. He, in turn, shared details of the unbelievable journey, the dangers faced, the people who helped him along the way. "You literally came from the other side of the world for me," she said in awe, as they slowly walked through the hospital gardens on the afternoon of her medical discharge. "Actually, I came to you," Tomás corrected, with the simplicity that always characterized him. The difference is important. 50 years had passed since that reunion. Time, which once separated them, now enveloped them in a gentle dance of shared memories, and love matured like fine wine. Tomás and Lucia, now aged 82 and 79 respectively, live in a country house on the green hills near a Spanish coastal town. The walls of their home are a living testament to their story. Photographs of abundant harvests, travels to distant places, growing children, and arriving grandchildren. Each image a chapter of a life built with patience and gratitude. Even at 82, Tomás still maintains a small garden at the back of the house, where he grows aromatic herbs and some vegetables. His hands, now marked by time as much as by the soil, move with the same reverence as always among the plants. Lucia, whose white hair frames a face that has aged gracefully, still watches him with admiration as he works, lovingly calling him my land teacher. Sometimes, she sits with her sketchbook and captures his image among the plants, a collection of moments spanning decades. In the late afternoons, especially in the summer, they sit together on the wooden porch that Tomás built with his own hands. From there, they watch their grandchildren running across the lawn, chasing a ball or simply exploring the world with the curiosity of childhood. On the main wall of the living room, in a small glass box, is Tomás's mother's old rosary worn by time and touch, but still intact in its meaning. Next to it, framed, is the torn map that guided him through the Amazon, and one of the photographs that brought Lucia to him in that distant hospital. "Grandma, tell the story again of how Grandpa crossed the forest for you," the youngest granddaughter often asks, her eyes shining with admiration. Lucia smiles, exchanging a knowing glance with Tomás before beginning. When something is true, it doesn't matter the ocean, the time, or the silence. One day the paths meet, and Tomás, sitting in his rocking chair, looks at the sky now painted in golden hues, as if silently giving thanks for every mile traveled, for every obstacle overcome, and for every small miracle that composed the great journey of his life. Sometimes, when the house is quiet and the grandchildren have already left, they return to being just the two of them, the Colombian farmer and the Spanish girl who met under a mango tree so many decades ago. Tomás takes Lucia's hand, now as calloused as his own, and kisses it with reverence. "It was worth every step," he simply says, and within those words lies all the wisdom life has taught them. that the greatest treasures demand the most difficult journeys. That faith, when true, finds paths where there seem to be none. And that love, when genuine, knows no distances, only destinations.